Lost potential, wasted talent, lack of student success, persistent talent underclass. These are not words we want to hear in relation to our education system. Research conducted by Jonathan Plucker and his colleagues at Johns Hopkins University on the excellence gap shows no progress toward highest achievement levels by minority groups. The gap between white, relatively affluent students and free and reduced lunch students is widening. What does this mean for our schools, our state, and our nation? What is the excellence gap?
The excellence gap is essentially the achievement gap at the advanced level of student achievement. Over the past 20 years, we've become so used to thinking about achievement gaps and how shrinking achievement gaps is really the focus of much of our public education system. There's no psychological, there's no biological reason why we should have those gaps. And so it really is the size of differences between groups of students at the highest levels of student achievement as opposed to minimum proficiency.
Jonathan Plucker and his colleagues at several different universities have analyzed the state-by-state results of the National Assessment of Educational Progress. This research revealed that lower socioeconomic demographic groups, as well as English language learners, Hispanic and African American students, were underrepresented at the highest levels of academic achievement. Their results were far below their counterparts. Why is the excellence gap important to schools and districts?
It's definitely critical. I think that a lot of it is not getting the attention that it should be receiving because attention is placed elsewhere, not to say that those areas are not needed as well. But if we don't do something about the disparity between different groups, socioeconomic, racial groups, we're going to continue to see some of the problems that we're seeing in our society now by not addressing and nurturing these young talents while we have the opportunity.
Vocabulary.
I think from the public's perspective, there's probably two big reasons why these excellence gaps and their pervasiveness are really, really troubling. The first is just economically and culturally. The vast majority of our highest performing students come from a fairly small part of our student population. As we move forward, we live in a culture, we live in an economy that has a tremendous thirst for talent. This country thrives on talent, on ideas, on creativity, on innovation. And unfortunately, the fastest growing parts of our student population are the groups that are suffering the worst from the excellence gap. That's just not long-term sustainable for this country. The second area is just fairness. If you have a really talented student, a student who has so much potential, a student who lives in the inner city, not of great means, not a lot of family support, not attending great schools, but who has the potential to be the person on that team that finally helps us solve pancreatic cancer, or is the person who is going to come up with that great idea that makes colonizing other planets possible. Those students are out there. Getting them to grade level and declaring victory doesn't make a lot of sense. Grade level proficiency is not, I repeat, is not the finish line. It really is a mile marker at the start of this long talent development run. We really focus so much now on just getting students up to grade level. If we can do that, we've accomplished a lot. We have, but we're still not helping change that student's life to the extent that we really, really should.
The Center for Evaluation and Education Policy acquired results from state assessments from 43 states. All 43 states indicated an excellence gap in elementary, middle, and high school for all subgroups. Although some state assessments were showing gains for most subgroups, The majority of states also experienced increased excellence gaps, strongly suggesting that the increase in students performing at advanced levels on state tests is not being shared by all subgroups of students. Let's look at some of the latest Kentucky data. The 2015 NAEP data shows the percentage of Kentucky grade 4 students scoring at the advanced levels in mathematics to be over 4 times greater for students who are not eligible for free reduced price school lunch than for students who were eligible for free reduced lunch. The NAEP mathematics data for grade 8 students showed similar results. Our Kentucky K-Prep results mirrored the NAEP data. The percentage of students not eligible for free or reduced lunch scoring at the distinguished level on the K-Prep has increased at a much faster rate than their less advantaged peers. When considering ethnicity, the data are just as disturbing for Hispanic and African American students. Note the large excellence gaps between white students and minorities. Only 10% of Hispanic students and only 6% of African American students scored at the distinguished level on the K-Prep at the elementary level. It's even more dismal at the middle school level, with only 7% of Hispanic students and 3% of African American students scoring distinguished. Unless we address these excellence gaps now with targeted, purposeful measures, these students may never catch up with their peers. One response to the excellence gap is to make closing the excellence gap a national, state, and local district policy. Addressing differences in educational opportunities for the highest achievers requires a unique response from policymakers. Sometimes even the best designed policy will have unintended consequences. What policy questions should we be asking?
One thing that we often recommend to people is really a series of 2 distinct questions. The first question is, how is this policy that we're considering, how could it potentially impact advanced students? I really do think that they just don't think about them. And so they worry about high school graduation and they put things in place that actually make it, for example, harder to graduate early, which a lot of advanced students can and probably should do. So that first question really is important. How does this policy potentially impact advanced students? The second question, I think, is equally important from an excellence gap perspective, which is how can this policy potentially get more students to be scoring advanced, to be performing at advanced levels, to be excelling? We don't ask that question enough, and I think there is some unintentional bias in that, again, we think getting students to grade level is victory.
Thinking back to those harsh words, lost potential, wasted talent, lack of student success, persistent talent underclass, we don't want these words to apply to our schools. What do you do to raise awareness of excellence gaps in your district?
It's something that, we hear about, we take the information in, we see the TIMSS data, we see the NAEP data, but then once it's gone, it's off our radar sometimes. So some way to get that in front of not just policymakers, leaders, but the people in our classrooms that are actually leading the actual work. So if we put that information in front of them in a very, meaningful way, then I think they'll pay more attention to it and start to help solve the problem.
Professional development is critical to be able to change mindsets. We talk a lot about achievement gaps, so they're very aware of that and looking at test scores and data to be able to look at those gaps. But we want them to also, on the flip side, look at your excellence gap.
These educational leaders have emphasized the importance of empowering teachers to address the excellence gaps in their classrooms and of conducting professional development in gifted and talented education. Additional strategies for closing excellence gaps will be shared in the second video of this 3-part series. In conclusion, we have 2 more big questions to answer. Why does closing the excellence gap matter? And how will getting rid of the excellence gap impact our society?
I think closing the gap will have a huge impact. We are all boggled down with some of the events that we see in the news, things that are going that you could have kids that could have made a positive impact that chose to perhaps use their gifts in a negative way. So we want to be able to channel gifts in the right way. I think that it would help with crime. I really do think that it helps to rebuild neighborhoods and to help children be a productive member of society, which is our goal as an educator, is to help students be productive members of society.
When the time comes, and we certainly hope it does, that we don't have an excellence gap, it will mean that children from all groups are scoring at proficient and advanced levels. And my goodness, that will be an exciting time.